I recently watched a video by Crispy Ginger who made a comment in my previous video regarding the blunderbuss rapier test, and he mentioned a few things that are pretty interesting points and worth pointing out. Firstly, whether or not we're considering fighting the worm versus, say, the hive or, let's say, M3s. And it does matter because in all of those different situations, you're going to have different amounts of DOTs applied, different amounts of Rens, weakens, etc. So in a lower group size, having someone running a main hand BB makes a ton of sense, in my opinion. In fact, it's 100% better than the rapier in a 5-man group. The question is, how does it perform in, say, a 20-man group when you have most likely an offhand BB player? And if not, then you probably have someone running BB regardless, just to apply those DOTs. So in his video, basically what his idea was is to remove all the DOTs from the blunderbuss and just focus on raw damage. So he ran net shot with none of the DOTs applied. And the problem with that is that you're losing the main purpose of net shot, because net shot is realistically not good at all without this last one. So it's not even worth getting if you're not going to pick this last one up. And then he's also probably, I'm not sure, but I'm assuming he didn't run Incendiary Burst as well, which we will be testing in this video as well too. But instead of running net shot, we're going to run claw shot because, like I said before, if you're not focusing on DOTs, you might as well just run claw shot to focus more on those unloads. And there's a few things I want to talk about too. Firstly, in his video, he did a backstab test with rapier, and it makes sense to do this if we're talking about optimal situations, but if we're referring to the worm, you're not going to be dealing backstabs. So I'm not sure what the idea of that test was if we're referring to the worm specifically. Now, if we want to talk about, let's say, a backstab boss, then that, would be a different situation. But even in that case, I think the blunderbuss will still outperform, just based on what I'm about to show you. So I guess I'll just go over kind of what this test will be all about. We're going to be going for 23% in power, which is going to come down to running a powerful honing stone, which is going to give us 7%, as well as ramp, which is going to give us another 16%. So that should be 23% total. We're not going to use a thrust damage ring. We're going to use keen awareness, which should be a pretty standard one to use regardless of the build anyways. And then, yeah, obviously blunderbuss, inferno. We can't really get rid of the flame attunement because Doomborn Hollow is the only weapon that has refreshing move, and refreshing move is kind of like the best perk that you can have for a blunderbuss, in my opinion, because it just lowers your cooldowns so much, and it just makes the most sense to use. So if we're going to talk about flame attunement here, then that's another story, but in my opinion, it shouldn't make a huge difference in these tests. So I mean, we'll see what the comments are, but I know that there's probably going to be a comment about that, so I might as well address it now. Other than that, the build is pretty much the same. The only thing that I will mention is that we don't have the keen shirt. So whether or not that makes a difference is up to you guys. I think it will make a slight difference, but ultimately, if you have the keen shirt, it will make it so that the blunderbuss will deal more damage overall on average. So if I had that, I'm assuming this test would actually be faster and it would outperform the rapier even more. But we're not using that. So with that said, let's get into these tests. The first test we're going to be doing is the blunderbuss without incendiary bursts, and then the test after that, we're going to run it with incendiary bursts, and that is our only DOT. So the first test will have pretty much no DOTs because obviously we're running claw shot, so there's nothing there. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. All right, so let's get into the first test. So based on these two tests, we can see that the non-incendiary grenade DOT setup was able to get a 1 minute 58 second test, while the incendiary grenade setup was able to get a 1 minute 36 second test. So pretty big difference. And of course, as no surprise, having DOTs in your build makes a huge difference, and incendiary grenades are obviously very, very strong because that DOT is extremely good. It's going to give you a 10% weapon damage buff, or it's going to apply a DOT of 10% for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 3 times. So if you hit all 3 grenades, it's obviously going to be a 30% DOT for 10 seconds, and that can be extended, obviously, and all this stuff. So it does make a pretty big difference, as you can see based on these two tests. But essentially, my whole idea here is to just figure out what is the discrepancy between Rapier and blunderbuss. How big of a difference is it at a top level? Because the build that I'm running right now, it may seem powerful, but you also have to cycle your abilities very perfectly. So don't expect to just pick this up and then get the same results. It may seem easy on the surface, but it all comes down to cycling light attacks into abilities, and you want to repeat that pretty consistently. If you don't get that pattern down, you won't be dealing anywhere near as much damage as I have been dealing in these tests. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's pretty much all I have to say. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.